Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells. And last time we chatted, we talked about the Cosby Show Halloween episode and all the troubles with Bill Cosby later in life. Or apparently all through his life, actually. But anyway. It was kind of a heavy episode, and I got some good feedback on it, which I appreciate. It wasn't as controversial as I thought it might be. It seems like the feedback has all been positive for the most part. So I'm glad that everyone understood what I was trying to say and do with that episode. Now, to balance it out, I thought this week we would do something that is just silly. So I was trying to think of like what would be a good, stupid, silly kind of thing to cover. And I had some ideas and some of them I wanted guests for and everything. And I was kind of stuck. And then I remembered something not quite from my childhood, more my adolescence, I guess you might say. My juvenile delinquent years. I remembered Beavis and Butthead. Yes, tonight we are going to talk about their Halloween special, known both as Cornholio, Lord of the Harvest, and Butt-O-Ween. Yep, we're taking it right down to that level. Now, before we begin, of course, I want to point you all to the show's website. That is spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode of the show, even the ones that are no longer available on iTunes. And you can also find pictures and outtakes and sometimes YouTube videos connected with the episode. And you can also find links to all of our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Instagram and Gmail. And don't forget, if you're a Halloween fiend, and I should hope you are if you're listening to this show, all this month, each and every day, I am posting pictures from Halloweens of my past. By the way, how do you say Halloween? I say Halloween, but some people say Halloween. And it always strikes my ear odd when people say that. Anyway. Yeah, so you can see pictures from Halloween's past. And, of course, you can join us on Facebook. There's two ways you can do that. There is the public group, which will just show people that you support the page, support the show. And also sometimes I will do little discussions there, and I will post contests. I just posted one for a Salem Care package. And, you know, it's not going to be anything too amazing, but it's some nice little trinkets that I've picked up while I was in Salem doing my Witchfinder thing all month. And so one lucky listener has won that, and she will be getting that shortly. And so those are the kind of things that go on there, but also on Facebook. That's, by the way, facebook.com/spookyas. That's how you can join us there. But if you are a true blue spookaroo, the real deal, the committed, then you can join the Spookaroos, which is a closed Facebook group. Why closed? Because that way you can talk about all the spooky things that you want without the fear of public judging you. No friends, family, employers who don't really understand what it's like to be obsessed with spooky stuff. So that's where you can do that. And that is, you can search for Spookaroos on Facebook. Make sure you click on the one that looks spooky, not the one that is some kind of children's clothing line, which is, Spookaroos is a weird name for children's clothing line, especially because they're not even spooky. I'd understand if it was like, you know, Dracula-inspired clothing or something, but it's not. I'm sorry if my voice is a little bit worn tonight. Of course, I am doing my Witchfinder gig in Salem all month long, and that means that I am standing on the street corner yelling at tourists and yelling with tourists as I perform my show. So my voice is a little bit raw at the moment, but I think we'll survive. Now, let's get into tonight's subject, which is Beavis and Butthead in general, and specifically their Halloween episode. But I know that I have a wide range of listeners as far as their ages go. So some of you are perhaps a little too old to have appreciated Beavis and Butthead in its time. Some of you are a little too young to appreciate Beavis and Butthead for what they were when they first came out. And the thing is, I was really into the show, but I have to admit, once they went off the air, they were kind of out of sight, out of mind, and I didn't really think about it all that much until they started releasing DVDs. And I don't know exactly when they did that, but I feel like it was around 2005, 2006 when the first DVD sets came out. And I started watching them, and I remembered everything, like every little detail. And it made me think of jokes with my friends and my ex-girlfriends from high school and all these things. I realized that they actually played a very large role, for better or worse, essentially through my high school years. And I'll talk about that as we go on. But the basics of Beavis and Butthead are this. Beavis and Butthead is an American animated sitcom. This is from Wikipedia. Created by Mike Judge. Yes, the same Mike Judge who went on to do King of the Hill, which is also a great show. And currently does Silicon Valley. Oh, actually, I'm not sure if they're still making new episodes. They may or may not be. I'm not sure. And the series, Beavis and Butthead, originated from an animated short that he did that was originally aired on Liquid Television, and this was called Frog Baseball, in which Beavis and Butthead appear, and they yell that they're going to play frog baseball, and then they play baseball with a live frog. So, yes, hitting it with a bat. Now, when I say that I love Beavis and Butthead, this isn't the part that I mean. The early episodes are a little bit rough, and I think even Mike Judge would admit this. But anyway, this was back when MTV was still kind of edgy, and they would kind of go for things like this. So they saw this short, and they said, we need to make this into a full series with these two, juvenile delinquents. So the series ran for seven seasons, from March 8th, 1993 until November 28th, 1997. And it returned later, just a couple years back in 2011, for one more season. But it didn't get renewed by MTV. And Mike Judge says that's because the target age for, the target that MTV that was trying to reach changed to basically young teenage women, and so they didn't really, Beavis and Butthead don't exactly fit that demographic, so MTV was not willing to pay to produce the show anymore, and so that's why it didn't get continued. But he also, in 1996, they made a movie called Beavis and Butthead Do America, and one of the cool things about that is Robert Stack has a very large role in that movie as an FBI agent trying to track down Beavis and Butthead. We won't go into the whole plot of that movie, but if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. Now, the show, Beavis and Butthead, was very controversial, with episodes like Frog Baseball and other episodes. Of course, the show is basically the adventures of these two idiots. And I think they're supposed to be about 14, 15, right around that age, I think. 16, maybe, at the most. But anyway, they're around that age, and they're just idiots. And the thing is, the comedy is very broad and lowbrow in a way, but, you hear comedians will sometimes say that a joke, like The Aristocrats, for example, if you've ever seen that documentary or if you're familiar with that joke, it's the same joke, but different comedians come up with their own variation on how to tell it. And so in that way, comedy is like jazz. You take something very basic and then you do something special with it. And I kind of feel like that's what Beavis and Butthead is. Their humor is not sophisticated, but it's the kind of thing where, you know what I'd say? It's more like punk rock than jazz. They're taking the core essence of what makes something funny or exciting and breaking it down. This sounds very philosophic for talking about Beavis and Butthead, but I'm telling you, this is what it is. They call each other names. They make unusual noises. They laugh at penis jokes. They're constantly coming up with different things to call the penis. They giggle over the term ween when people say Halloween in this Halloween special. They go, ween. And, yes, on one level, that's just stupid. But somehow on this show, it works. And Mike Judge does the voice of both Beavis and Butthead. And there are things in his performance, especially when he's doing Beavis. There's just little hints of things that he does that he kind of throws in. And I have some examples that I'm going to play for you later on that he throws in that just, in my mind, and hopefully yours too, make things a million times funnier than they would appear to be on paper. So I don't know if I'm doing a great job explaining the appeal of Beavis and Butthead, but if you haven't seen it, there's clips available on YouTube and you can buy the DVD sets. It's probably available on iTunes too. And I, especially maybe not the early episodes, but after that, when they kind of hit their groove, it's still controversial. There's still things that they say that are, are not okay, and that's kind of the point. But South Park referenced them as being an influence. So do many other programs and even comedians. So they've definitely made their place. Even David Letterman was a big fan. David Letterman, the king of late night. After Johnny Carson, of course. He was a big Beavis and Butthead fan and appeared with them. But the show, like I said, was controversial because they were such idiots. And the fear was that children were watching the show and idolizing Beavis and Butthead and trying to copy their actions. In fact, these early episodes that I'm talking about, they depicted juvenile obsessions with fire. This is also from Wikipedia. And other dangerous behaviors, which often led to Beavis chanting, "Fire! Fire!" And the show was blamed for the death of a 2-year-old named Jessica Matthews in Ohio in October of 1993. The girl's 5-year-old brother, Austin, set fire to the mother's mobile home with a cigarette lighter. And, of course, the 2-year-old died in this fire, which is terrible. And the mother said this was because the child had been watching one of the fire-related segments on Beavis and Butthead and saw how much the characters liked fire, so then he wanted to create fire, and so he burned down the house. In response, MTV pulled the episode temporarily, but the neighbors claimed that the family didn't even have cable television. MTV is a cable network, so without cable, they would not have been able to view Beavis and Butthead in their mobile home right before this kid set the place on fire. But still, as a result of these kind of complaints, MTV said, we're going to remove segments about fire, we're going to remove certain episodes, and also you're not allowed to have Beavis chant fire, fire, and don't even have him say the word fire. So, okay, but Mike Judge, being the guy that he wasn't just going to let that go, so he found a little loophole, and he and the writers, you could tell, were making jokes of this, because not the child dying, of course, but the fact that Beavis and Butthead would inspire people to set their homes on fire or something like that. So Beavis, he wouldn't chant fire, fire anymore, but he would say things that sounded similar. For example, in one episode, he is working at a McDonald's-like restaurant called Burger World, and he is using the fryer to make, he's supposed to be making French fries. What they end up doing with it is a whole nother thing, but as he's using it, he says, "Fryer, fryer." So that's an example of how they would try to get around it. And of course, there's one episode where he starts saying, "Liar, liar, pants on." Oh. And he just kind of stops himself. But if you know the history of the controversy, that's very funny. In February of '94, watchdog media group Morality in Media claimed that the death of an 8-month-old named Natalia Rivera was caused in part by Beavis and Butthead. The infant was struck by a bowling ball which had been thrown from an overpass onto a highway in Jersey City, New Jersey. The culprit was an 18-year-old named Calvin J. Settle. Morality in Media said that Settle was influenced by the episode Ball Breakers, in which Beavis and Butthead load a bowling ball with explosives and then drop it from a rooftop. While Morality in Media claimed that the show inspired Settle's actions, the case's prosecutors did not make such a claim. It was later revealed by both prosecutors and the defendant that the Settle home did not have cable and that he was never a fan of the show. Even so, with all this controversy surrounding Beavis and Butthead, the show did come out with a warning. There were 2 versions of it, and of course the second one is the one that has become famous.
Beavis and Butthead are not role models, not even human. They're cartoons. Some of the things they do would cause a person to get hurt, expelled, arrested, possibly deported. To put it another way, don't try this at home.
Going back to my personal remembrances of Beavis and Butthead, the show first came on, I think it was at like 7 o'clock at night or 7:30, something like that. I remember it was either right before or right after Speed Racer. They used to show old cartoons of Speed Racer, which always, that show kind of freaked me out. There was a freaky monkey in that show. But anyway, I did watch Beavis and Butthead because, it was a hip thing to do at the time, man. Like everyone who's cool was watching Beavis and Butthead. But my mom, she wasn't very strict most of the time, and especially I was the 4th kid. She was very sick already as I was growing up, so she had other things on her mind, and I was basically a good kid. I didn't cause trouble. I wasn't getting in trouble in school, so, there's not a lot of parental enforcement in my house, but I think that she must have heard on the news or something that Beavis and Butthead was bad, because all of a sudden she was like, you're not allowed to watch that show, when it first came on, maybe the first season or 2. And I was kind of bummed because we only had, remember this is back in the day, we only had cable in the living room. So if I was going to watch it, I'd have to watch it in the living room, and now I couldn't because my mom would be out in the living room at 7 o'clock, or maybe in the kitchen, which was right next to the living room. So it wasn't really an option to watch it, unfortunately. I'd have to catch it, in reruns or something at a different time. But then because of all these controversies and people saying, well, this is on too early in the evening and kids are watching and, blah, 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 they changed the time to, I think, 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And my mom was in bed by then. So I could go out and watch Beavis and Butthead at that point. So the time change actually did me a big favor. And I became an avid watcher. And eventually my mom dropped her complaints about it and was fine with me watching it anyway. In fact, I had several friends that I remember watching it, and maybe this isn't an awesome time to admit this, considering we were just saying how, like, oh, kids don't really copy it and these kids weren't setting things on fire. But there were certain things that happened on the show that my friends and I did impersonate in real life, but it wasn't those kinds of things. It was the stupid stuff. There is an episode where they go to a copy shop and try to copy money, to counterfeit money. But of course they do it very poorly. They do it one-sided, black and white. They photocopy change. But anyway, the point is Beavis comes with some paper money, and he goes and drops it into the UNICEF fund up at the cash register, and he's trying to impress a woman because they're always trying to score, as they would say on the show. And he just goes up and he's like, I like to help the kids, I like to give back. And again, it's a subtle little thing, but it's just funny. He's trying to impress this grown woman by, giving money to charity. But of course, it's copied quarters or something like that he's dropping in there. And he's too dumb to even realize that, of course, this is an idiotic plan. So again, stupidity is a big part of the show, but that's what makes it funny. Now, that's what the other thing I was going to say is that, this wasn't just for boys, despite what MTV now thinks. Teenage girls were also into Beavis and Butthead. The girl I dated pretty much all through high school was also a fan. I remember going to see the movie with her. And in fact, my little pet name for her, and this is just goes to show you that I've always been a romantic, was Gonad, which is something that Beavis and Butthead would call each other. And I don't know, we just thought it was funny. And Nads feature heavily in the Halloween episode that we're going to talk about momentarily. So, I would just say, hey, Nad, whatever. And that's the romantic that I was in high school. But hey, we were together for 4 years, and I broke it off. So something was working real good. And by the way, she was 2 years older than me. What? Yeah, that's right. Total stud. All right, so now that you have all of that important background, you can properly appreciate the Halloween episode. This is an actual Halloween special that aired on Halloween. It aired for the first time on Halloween night, October 31st, 1995. And this was perfect timing for me because I was definitely done with trick-or-treating by then, although not too long before. And I did go one time later, but we'll talk about that at another time. So this aired on Halloween night, and I'm sure that I was home watching it. And I want to give you an example of the comedy of Beavis and Butthead, and I'm going to kind of break down a scene here. And I want to play it in its entirety first, and then I'm going to kill comedy by breaking down the scene. Of course, comedy isn't funny when you break it down, but I want to make sure you're picking up all the beats as we go along here and see, even if it doesn't make it funny to you, maybe you can appreciate what makes it funny to a certain segment of the population, including myself. So here is part of the opening scene, and then we're going to break it down a little bit.
Damn it, that's like the 10th time tonight or something. Maybe we should see who it is. Oh yeah.
Trick or treat.
Cool. Who was that? Just some dudes passing out free samples. Cool. Free samples rule.
You take my kid's candy, and I kick your ass! Happy Halloween!
Ween.
Okay, so there is the scene, and let's talk about it a bit here. We hear the doorbell ring, and Butthead realizes that the doorbell has been ringing a lot tonight, and he's like, damn it, that's the 10th time already that this doorbell keeps ringing. And then Beavis says, well, maybe we should see who it is. And Butthead says, oh yeah, like this is a thought that has not occurred to them before. So this is clue number one, that these two are not geniuses. And that is, laugh number one, that like they're so dumb they didn't even think to go and see who was ringing the doorbell. It's been ringing so much. They realize it's been ringing so much, but they didn't even think to go and see who it is. Now, he opens the door, and it's children trick-or-treating. He doesn't even seem to notice the kids. He just looks at the bags of candy, says, cool, takes the bags of candy, and slams the door in their face. And at this point, we're thinking, oh, that sucks. He just stole the candy from the kids. But then Beavis comes over and says, so, who was at the door? And Butthead says, oh, it's just some dudes giving out free samples. He didn't even pick up the fact that these were children, that they were trick-or-treating, that it's Halloween, that they were looking for candy, not giving away candy. He just saw candy and was like, oh, cool, that's for me. Free samples. Now, that's one way to look at it. Of course, we could wonder if he really does know what's going on here and still just wanted to take candy from the children. But I don't think that's the intention. I think he honestly didn't know what was going on, and that, again, showing how dumb these two are and how single-mindedly focused they become on one thing at a time. And that's a big running factor in Beavis and Butthead. They can only ever focus on one thing, it seems like. And point to that is what happens next. The father of the children comes in. He says, you take my kid's candy, I'm going to kick your ass. He kicks their ass, takes the candy back. They're writhing in pain on the floor. He kicks the door back open and says, happy Halloween, boys, or whatever, and walks away. And Beavis and Butthead are writhing on the floor, and they don't even reflect on the fact that they just got kicked or whatever. They're just writhing around, and because the man said Halloween, Butthead says, ween. So again, we see that in a way, these two are kind of like Zen masters who are only living in the moment. He even forgets his pain so that he can make a dick joke. Another thing that Beavis and Butthead was famous for was that in between their cartoons, there were little segments, they would show music videos. And you would hear Beavis and Butthead doing commentary over the video, and sometimes the camera would turn and you'd see them sitting in front of the TV watching the video. This happens 3 times in the Halloween episode, and the first video they show is Alice Cooper's Teenage Frankenstein. And they like it immediately because you see a woman wearing kind of a thong in her outfit, and so they say, ooh, a butt. And so they're all on board from there, and they also talk about Frankenstein. The next scene we have is them walking the streets, and Butthead says it's too bad that Beavis says that it's too old. Let me try that again. Beavis says it's too bad that they're too old for trick-or-treating. And then Butthead says, no way, there aren't any laws about Halloween. And that got me thinking, and this is what I want to pose to you. This is my question of the week for you guys. You can reach out to me on social media or on the website, email, and let me know what you think. What age is the age where you need to stop trick-or-treating? When I was a kid, I distinctly remember feeling like when I turned 12, that would be the end. I wouldn't trick-or-treat anymore, and I was kind of like not a kid. And even as an adult, and I wonder if it's because for whatever reason I made that choice when I was a kid, or if it's because that really is the case. But I started to feel different after age 12. I started to feel like I'm not like a little kid anymore, and I shouldn't be doing little kid things like trick-or-treating. As I said earlier, I did go out one more time after that, and that was very ill-advised when I was in high school. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I must have been 15, 16, something like that. Anyway, I was a theater kid when I was in high school, and it wasn't looked down upon in my school. It was actually kind of a cool thing to do theater. Even the jocks, a lot of times, ended up doing theater. Captain of the football team was one of the theater kids. So there was a large group of us, and someone got it in their head that, hey, we should go trick-or-treating. And I was kind of like, oh, this is a really bad idea, but we'll go. And, of course, we decided to do group costumes, and at the time, it was really considered funny and cool to go trick-or-treating as pimps and hoes. So that's what we did. Hey, this is the late 90s, gang. These were the cool things to do. Well, it turned out to be not so cool because we went a little bit later than the children, obviously. I don't know what time it was. It wasn't like crazy late at night, but it was late enough that people were like, get the fuck out of here when we showed up at their door for the most part. Some people just kind of played along, but a lot of people just turned around and ignored us. And I don't blame them looking back on it. A bunch of teenagers dressed up like pimps and hoes. Ugh. Also, we ran into this guy who was just like roaming the streets. And he had a really runny nose, and it was like kind of white, the stuff running from his nose. And he was like, you guys look good. You guys look really good. You all look really good. Like, he just kept saying it. And, of course, the women with us were getting creeped out. So I guess in a way it was a very scary Halloween. And he, like, popped up like 3 times during the night. And it's probably more dangerous than we remember now. Like, that doesn't seem great. You know, looking back on it now. And at the time, we were freaked out. In fact, one of the girls started calling him Michael Myers. And we even walked to the grocery store to use the payphone. Those were still a thing. To call the police. We didn't call 911, but we called the police and just said, hey, like, there's a guy, like, roaming the streets out here. And he's, you know, he hasn't said anything, like, too terrible to us or anything. But he's kind of creeping us out and following us around. And I don't remember exactly what the police response was, but they were probably like, well, you're too fucking old to be trick-or-treating, and it's too late at night anyway, so this is on you. Anyway, back to Beavis and Butthead. So they decide to go trick-or-treating, and one of my favorite scenes comes up, and this is where Beavis decides what he's going to be for Halloween. He comes in with a pair of underwear on his head, and he tells Butthead that he is going to be a Nad. Now, he's just got underwear on his head. That's his only, you know, costume bit, if you want to call it that. And Beavis calls him a dumbass, and then he says, oh, that gives me an idea, and he leaves the room. Now, when he leaves the room, Beavis begins to practice in the mirror, introducing himself and his trick-or-treating technique. And this is one of the little moments that I was talking about where I think you can kind of see Mike Judge's genius. I think that what you're about to hear is very funny. You might disagree with me, but this is Beavis practicing in the mirror his salesman technique. Basically, he's selling himself, and he's trying to seal the deal and get that candy. Candy is for closers.
Hi, I'm a Nad. No, wait. Hi, I'm a Nad. How's it going? Can I have some candy, please? I'm a Nad.
I don't have to defend myself to you. I think that scene is hysterical. And if you disagree, that's on you. You don't have the kind of lighthearted whimsy in your life that I have in my life. So now they go trick-or-treating, but people still don't really recognize them as costumes because Beavis is wearing underwear on his head. Butthead has just poured some cheese over himself and calls himself Nachos, although later he claims that he's a dumbass. But anyway, it's not really working out for them. But as they're trick-or-treating, one of the houses they go to, their neighbor is dressed up as the Lone Ranger. And this got me thinking, did you ever have in your neighborhood adults that dressed up to pass out candy? This is my second question of the week, I guess. Did you ever have adults that dressed up to pass out candy on Halloween? In my neighborhood, there were two, and they didn't really dress up. There was one guy named Stan who was a nice guy, but on Halloween, he would put on a witch's hat, and when you came to ring his doorbell, he would jump out at you and kind of cackle at you. And he did it every year. So eventually it really wasn't that scary anymore, but when we were little kids, we thought it was very scary. And then there was another guy who, I'm about to get in so much trouble because I don't remember the name, but he had a mask. You know the like big green bulldog looking guys in Star Wars in the Return of the Jedi that are at Jabba the Hutt's palace, the like Gungarian guards or something like that? I'm sorry, Star Wars nerds. I should know, not because I'm a huge Star Wars nerd myself, but because my brother certainly is, and I should know. But I it's something along those lines. But anyway, he had the mask of that, and he would wear it, and he wouldn't talk, and he would come out very slow, and he didn't jump out at you or anything, but yeah, that was the Asian guy that used to live at the end of the block. He used to do that. And another thing about the neighborhood that I grew up in, trick-or-treating, my neighbor had an old-fashioned lamppost. Did I talk about this recently? I might have, but I'm going to talk about it again, even if I did. And, it was just a normal kind of lamppost thing that you would have, to light a driveway or whatever. But at Halloween time, she would put a witch's mask over the top and a witch's hat and tie a cape around it. Didn't even have like a full body or anything, but just the mask, the hat, and the cape. And then, of course, at night, when she turned the lamppost on, the eyes would appear to light up in this witch's mask, right? Now, my neighbor, Kim, who was born just 2 days after me, and we grew up as kids together. We played together all the time as kids, best friends as kids. And this was her mother. This was her house that had this lamppost. And we knew that this was not a real witch. We weren't so dumb to think that, like, this was a real witch. We knew that this was a mask that her mom had bought, and she puts on. We watched her do it. We, put on the lamppost. But even so, we were kind of creeped out by this thing, because although we knew it wasn't real, we were slightly concerned that at night she could become real, and then would get us. So anyway, just thinking about old things from the neighborhood. So let me know. Write in or reach out to me on Facebook and let me know. Were there things like that in your neighborhood? Did the adults dress up in costume to pass out candy? And if so, what did you think about it? And when is a good age to stop trick-or-treating? When is it no longer appropriate to go trick-or-treating? I would bet some of you might even think 12 was too old. Or I guess 11 would be the last year that I went trick-or-treating. But that's, you still might think that's too old, but hey man, free candy's free candy. To Beavis and Butthead, of course, they are trick-or-treating. No one's giving them any candy. So Beavis says, we got to go to a dumb person's house. So they go to their neighbor, Tom Anderson, which is kind of the forerunner of Hank Hill, vocal-wise anyway, sound-wise. This is also Mike Judge doing the voice. And he answers the door and he's about to give him candy, but the phone rings, so he walks away, leaving this big empty bowl of candy in front of Beavis and Butthead. So Beavis is so frustrated with how the night is gone, he goes and eats the candy. And of course, if you are a regular viewer of Beavis and Butthead, you would know by this point, anytime Beavis eats too much sugar or drinks too much caffeine, he changes and is no longer Beavis, but is in fact the great Cornholio, who needs TP for his bunghole. If you didn't find any of what I just said funny, then you're really not going to enjoy the rest of the show. Maybe sit this one out. We'll be back to ghost stories and that kind of stuff next time. But anyway, yes, he eats this bowl of candy, and another hilarious moment, he turns to the trick-or-treater arrives at the door, a regular child with her father, and she asks for candy and, trick-or-treat, and Beavis turns and, I don't know if you'd call it yelling or growling or something in between at this poor child. And the face he makes here, it's not very often that they look straight on into the camera, and they look very weird when they do in general. And of course, Beavis is wearing his underwear on his head and his face is covered in chocolate, his mouth anyway, and he's screaming at this girl. It's a very intense and very funny face. I will post a picture, of course, on the social medias. Now, I say that he transformed, but he didn't quite fully transform. He just started the constant motion. What happens is when he turns into Cornholio, it's a constant motion, and he just gets, he's shaking and, waving his fists and holding his hands up in the air, and he does that kind of noise, constantly. And he just, again, going back to the jazz analogy, he's only going to say a few things, and they're all stupid, but the way he just arranges things is funny. I'm sorry, it's funny. But he doesn't really fully transform until he gets outside and he sees a trick-or-treater, and the trick-or-treater asks him,
I'm the Great Pumpkin. Who are you supposed to be?
I am Cornholio. I need TP for my bunghole.
And at that point, Beavis pulls his shirt up to the crown of his head, I guess you would call it. So his face is just sticking out of his t-shirt. This makes the transformation complete. For some reason, this is always what he did when he was Cornholio, and he turned into Cornholio several times throughout the series run. And I loved every single time. Now, for reasons never fully explained, Beavis, as Cornholio, is always looking for TP for his bunghole. TP is toilet paper, of course. He also variously claims that he has no bunghole, that he serves the great, glorious bunghole. It's, again, don't try to make sense of it, just enjoy it. But anyway, this is the rare episode where he actually gets TP for his bunghole, because he runs into Stuart, who's kind of like a nerdy kid that, for some reason, wants to hang out with Beavis and Butthead. He's probably the only kid in town that wants to, but he thinks that they're cool. But he's like this kind of wussy, nerdy kid, and he's hanging out, and he was going to go TP somebody's house, was his idea, till he runs into Cornholio, and Cornholio demands the TP for his bunghole, but he doesn't really do anything with it. He just kind of drags it along behind him until he eventually loses it and doesn't seem to notice. So even the TP isn't really that important to Cornholio. The rest of the episode is basically him walking around as Cornholio and Butthead following him and trying to get candy for himself. They run into Todd. Butthead, is abducted by Todd because he asks to hang out with him. And Todd starts to mess with Beavis, but once Beavis starts yelling at him and, he can see that the kid is kind of freaking out, Todd's like, this is messed up, and just leaves Beavis off, takes his candy, but leaves Beavis alone. Beavis continues the night, gets candy from other people, hangs out in a graveyard, and then he sings the song of Cornholio.
I am Cornholio. Rajulio, bunghole. I have no bunghole. I have no bunghole. I am the great Cornholio. bunghole. The great almighty one and only Cornholio. I have no bunghole. I have Cornholio in my bunghole.
I forgot to mention we had another video a little bit earlier in this. The second video was Hollywood Halloween by Paul Broek. Not sure if I'm saying that right, but I don't think it's that important to know anyway. But that is the song that was played. And one of the interesting things about this video is there's a rare moment where Beavis actually picks on Butthead, like unprovoked, and kind of intelligently too. Let's listen in.
Well, check it out. He has an eyeball in his mouth.
That would be cool if you had, like, an eyeball in your butt, and then you could, like,
Shut up, butthead. You always say stuff like that.
Beavis, I'm gonna shove your eyeballs up your butt sideways if you ever tell me to shut up again.
So I meant to talk about that earlier. I forgot. Now we're actually at the third video after the whole Song of Cornholio thing. This is a video by King Diamond, the metal band King Diamond, called The Family Ghost. And they, you would think that Beavis and Butthead would like a video like this because it's a guy wearing makeup, kind of Kiss-like makeup, and it's a metal band, and there's dancing women and everything like that. And fire. So you would think that these guys would like this video, but they actually hate it. Beavis even declares it some of the worst crap he's ever seen. Now, to be fair, King Diamond is singing in a weird falsetto. It kind of sounds like Elmo singing a heavy metal song. It is weird, and the video is weird too. And they eventually go from like hating on the video to just feeling sorry for the band. And it leads to this rather funny visualization here.
Oh, boy. This is really sad. It's probably like, he has kids and stuff. And he's like, okay, kids, I gotta put on my makeup and go do another show.
Yeah, it's too bad, really.
And from there, the episode basically ends with Beavis and Butthead getting captured by this weird farmer guy who's also real creepy. He captures Butthead first, and we don't see what happens, but then he captures Beavis, and Beavis wakes up the next day. He is in a barn hanging from a hook by his shirt, and he is, slept off his Cornholio experience. He's wondering where he is, and then Butthead and the farmer enter, and they're both kind of green colored, and Butthead seems a little out of it. And then they pick up chainsaws, and we pan to the outside of the barn. Beavis screams, blood splatters the screen, and that is the end of the episode. So, if you're not a Cornholio fan, I am sure that this episode did nothing for you. But if you're a Beavis and Butthead fan, chances are you're a pretty big fan of the great Cornholio, who needed TP for his bunghole. So as far as Halloween episodes go, I like this as a Halloween episode because it is very holiday centered. There is trick-or-treating the whole night. We get to see other kids in their costumes, and some of them are just kind of generic, like witches and, a tiger and that kind of thing. But we see a lot of Power Rangers, which was topical at the time because Power Rangers were a big deal. And of course, we know children Halloween costumes, they tend to go in fads. I didn't really do that. When it was my choice, when I was old enough to make my own choices, I basically always went as, some super dope monster. I was a Wolfman for 2 or 3 years in a row because I loved werewolves when I was little. And so I always went with monsters, but, some less imaginative kids who don't quite understand what the holiday is supposed to be about will dress as Power Rangers or something like that. If you're a Beavis and Butthead fan and you haven't seen the show in a long time, I would recommend you go back and check out this episode, especially, like I said, if you're a fan of the Great Cornholio. And it's, again, very low humor and very simple humor, but even just, I need Roleos for my bunghole. I would hate for my bungholio to get polio. Like, this is what I'm talking about with the jazz references. Stupid, simple, and yet he's riffing on it and coming up with these things. And again, even just the little subtle ticks and noises that he does with his voice, I don't think, although Beavis and Butthead is certainly appreciated and Mike Judge as a creator in general is appreciated, I don't think he gets enough credit for the voice acting that he does with Beavis and the little kind of things that he throws in like that, those little changes in pitch that make it so funny. Again, I'm not here to explain comedy to you. If you don't like it and you don't think it's funny, that's on you. I'm not apologizing for it anymore. Beavis and Butthead is funny, Cornholio is funny, and Butt-O-Ween was very funny. All right, that does it for today's episode. So once again, please check out the website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. Find us on Instagram at spookyasshit. And of course, thank you for listening. Next week, we will have our final, well, it actually won't be next week. It'll be towards the end of this week, hopefully. We will have our final episode before Halloween, because this episode's coming out late, so timing's a little funny. But yeah, so it'll be the final episode before Halloween. It will not be another watch and review. I did 2 in a row. I almost did a third, and I said, no, I can't do 3 in a row, even if it is a Halloween special. So we're going to do something different, something a little more traditionally spooky. And I don't want to spill all the beans just yet, but you'll have to kind of tune in and check that out. But I certainly appreciate you listening to this episode, and I would also appreciate it if you got any spooky friends out there. And this time of year, if they're not spooky, then they're definitely not going to like the show. But if they are spooky, if you got some spooky folks out there, share the show with them. Subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you happen to listen. I love seeing those 5-star reviews especially, but any reviews are good reviews. And it really helps to keep my creative juices flowing when I know that the show is being listened to and enjoyed. So please keep that up. And again, anything you can do to help out the show would be very much appreciated, but the best thing you can do is just keep on listening, and I am so happy that you have chosen to spend this time with me. Until next time, Spookaroos, don't be afraid.
Trick or treat, son of a bitch! You cannot escape the almighty bunghole! Run as you may. You cannot escape.